What can change the nature of a man?
When you press a button, something awesome has to happen. So button awesome.
Storytelling in games hasn't had the best track record, even going back to the early days. I'm sure you've heard the quote by John Carmack, liking it to pornos, and it's just there to facilitate what the player does. When it comes to something as complex and abstract as morality, well, it really doesn't get much better. For all the effort that developers put into hiding it, the fact is, game development is essentially one big trick of smoke and mirrors. Shaders, lighting, sound design, camera transitions, all that stuff is there to create an illusion and stop players from trying to look behind the curtain. It's a necessity of programming that everything is broken down into numbers, booleans. But what happens when you're trying to tell a story outside of binary variable checks? Morality never really made the transition into video games that well. Obviously, by its very nature as an interactive medium, simply presenting ideas through more passive storytelling like films or print media means you're basically just being told what to do or think. Look at the ending of The Last of Us 2, for example, and how cowardly Naughty Dog was for not allowing people to make that choice. But any game that tries to explore morality in good faith needs that kind of agency. The problem is that most games never really ventured, even to this day, outside of binary good and evil choices. Whether or not these choices are good, as in well written, by themselves, is a whole other can of worms that we won't get into here. But while I can understand tonally, games like Fable aren't trying to examine the human condition and whatnot, it ultimately leaves the morality system feeling kind of pointless, or tacked on for the sake of it. An easy example would be the Infamous games. They were perfectly serviceable and I had fun time with them back in the day, but Infamous is a great example of presenting binary choices when there are so many other options potentially involved. Whether or not the press X to save humanity or whatever is up on screen, whether a button prompt is there or not, the attempts to add weight to the player's actions in the story rings a bit hollow when it doesn't really do much in either case. To be fair, this was more a problem with Second Son. At least with Infamous 1 and 2, the games felt different and there were some nice visual changes based on what path Cole was heading down. I'm not saying that adding a single prompt to your game means you're beholden to do the kind of branching The Witcher 2 experimented with. Obviously that's a massive ask for resources. My point is more that if you're presenting a choice and it doesn't really change much regardless, then why have it in the first place? Does Cole, or Delsin, really change as a person between games whether or not he's got the glowing red eyes? Would the story be any different if the morality element wasn't there? Not really. The Mass Effect trilogy and how badly it handled morality overall could be a master's thesis just on its own. I've spoken before about how much I love these games, how groundbreaking the characters were, and how the industry is still playing catch up to a lot of this stuff today, but let's be real, the Renegade Paragon system was never particularly fleshed out. BioWare devs have gone on the record many times that unlike the strictly good or evil divide of something like KOTOR or even Jade Empire, it wasn't really meant to represent the best or worst actions per se. The intention was more to try and push Shepard in one direction more than the other. Instead of good or evil, the player could choose to be diplomatic or ruthless. Dragon Age 2 attempted a similar thing and arguably succeeded in how Hawke's personality could change. The problem with the trilogy though is that it became tied to clear moral choices and you had to invest in one side or another to reach the same kind of arbitrary check. As a result, most players would be exclusively Paragon or exclusively Renegade, regardless of the dilemma posed in situations, because they were essentially gaming the system to be able to unlock other choices down the line. Rather than letting players evaluate what the best course of action could be, it just turned out to be the same morality system that BioWare had done in all their games before. Mass Effect 3 tried to remedy this with general reputation rather than Paragon or Renegade meters, but it was too little too late. And let's just ignore the 3 ice cream flavors of the ending. Probably the worst example I can think of for a morality system was my experience playing Exodus. If there was ever an example of a game that didn't need one, it would be the gritty, bleak world of post-apocalyptic Russia. For some reason, 4A thought it was a good idea to gate endings behind a hidden morality system. Why this was such a bad idea was because the game was a brutal, survival-adjacent shooter, not a purely story-driven game or classic RPG. when I first played Exodus and got the bad ending where Artyom dies, it annoyed the hell out of me, so much that I immediately began replaying it and went to read up on what the hell just happened. In fairness, Exodus wasn't the first to try this, although it must have been about 4 or 5 years between playing 2033 and Last Light by the time I got around to it, and the game does do a pretty good job telegraphing the morality system in the background at the beginning of the game. That doctor sits down and subtly implies that your life is depending on the blood donations that the others have been giving. Sounds all good on paper, right? Well, that's the thing, because this is a shooter, remember? It's the kind of thing that you can blink and miss it, but I cannot for the life of me understand why the game punishes you for shooting and killing people in a shooter. I'm not just picking on Metro, by the way. This is something that most FPS games do to some extent. Just look at that infamous example in Modern Warfare. Players tried to shoot the baby in the crib. I can see what 4A games were attempting to do with the morality system, and as we'll get to in a bit, I appreciate that it's not a blatant bar pop-up or something obnoxious like X will remember that. Still, I don't understand why you would disincentivize players from engaging with your combat system when you made an open world shooter. I'm not saying I want to go around and mow down civilians like it's a GTA style sandbox or something, but why am I playing in the first place then? I love Dishonored, but the games fall into a similar trap. Don't get me wrong, I think the Void and how it manifests in reality is fascinating in terms of world building, but it's still just a coat of paint on the otherwise bog standard morality system. Even though I'm the type of player who very rarely engages in combat anyway, and I prefer to obsess over the perfect, undetected run, the game stopping to wave its finger at you for daring to kill someone in a very hostile world just doesn't work or feel right. If anything, it's more egregious than Exodus because you're literally an assassin. The whole point is to kill people and achieve the objective as you see fit, but the game will essentially punish you for doing assassin things. And yeah, the world reacting to your deeds is part of the immersive sim shtick, and I'm not saying that the player should be able to do whatever with zero consequences, but Arcane painted themselves into a bit of a corner, much like BioWare did. And sure, it's worth noting that getting a good or bad ending for many people doesn't matter to them, and they just fuck around and do whatever they want anyway. Still, it seems like a design flaw for many games that attempts morality systems to just punish players for playing a certain way, rather than being more open or just cutting the morality altogether. So, with everything we've covered so far, how do we fix it? Well, the good news is, we don't really need to look far, because there's a ton of games that have been doing exactly that. It's simple. 3 words. Hide the bar. That little spiel at the beginning of the video wasn't to set up the idea we should invest in making some complex functionality that doesn't rely on booleans or whatnot, because the player doesn't see any of that anyway. All developers need to do to make their morality systems infinitely better is not broadcast the choices being made. Dragon Age Origins is one of my favourite games for this reason. Instead of the BioWare standard of good guy points versus bad guy points, it tied moral choices to character reactions and let them inform how the world reacted. The benefits of this were immeasurable. Alistair losing his shit over sacrificing Isolde, for example, and seeing that little approval lost pop up after speaking with him has more weight to it than just light side points gained or whatever. I'm not hanging shit on KOTOR, by the way. I already made a whole video going into detail about how much I love those 2 games, especially the Sith Lords, which is a fascinating case study for exploring grey morality in a previously black and white universe. But having characters to bounce off your choices and explore how you and the rest of your party feels is more authentic and grounded. I talked about this recently in how games handle choice and trying to move past hand-waving away a lot of your actions in ending slides, but The Witcher 3 is another good example of how characters can portray your morality system far better than some sparkling particle effect in a slider can. I still have a lot of problems with the idea of implicit choice in the Witcher series, and how badly the 3rd game sets up its endings through Ciri, but that's a story for another day. Point being, a character leaving based on the culmination of your choices, or a fatal mistake that results in a death, means a hell of a lot more than a grayed out option in dialogue. Characters are the heart and soul of any good storytelling, so let them play a part in how you explore morality too. Good news is, it doesn't just stop there, because like all good things in life, it all comes back to Fallout. Similar to the reputation system in classic Baldur's Gate, a lot of games that followed in the wake of the Greats have used a general rating or reputation system for how much you've done for the world. This, in turn, often affects how NPCs react to you. Fallout 3 misunderstood this with how stupid and illogical it is that Three Dog would be constantly yapping to an entire wasteland's worth of people about some random kid, but New Vegas mastered what the series was always best at: factions. If you're one of those people still hanging around in the belief that I hate New Vegas or something from that Fallout video a while back, as if heaping all that praise on Dead Money wasn't enough to disprove that, then boy oh boy, do I have some good news for you. Fallout New Vegas is one of, if not the, best example I can think of in how not just characters, but the world can react to your choices. By pivoting away from that stupid omniscient morality system of Fallout 3, and instead creating a kind of moral ecosystem with the push and pull from various factions based on what you do, you're essentially making moral choices without ever being told that it's right or wrong. Gaining reputation among the powder gangers, for example, doesn't mean a giant laser is going to shoot down from the sky because you're being a naughty boy. Your character has simply chosen one allegiance, and even then, that can change at any time. New Vegas is so good in how it was able to transcend some overarching moral binary that reshapes the world because one random guy stole a sweet roll or whatever, into fully embracing the grey areas that actual moral choices present. If most games, not just RPGs, had long presented morality in a binary choice, like turning a light switch on and off, New Vegas was like jumping into an ocean. There's no clear direction, and up and down, back and forwards is just as viable as anything else. It's so elegant, because the faction's response then feeds back into the rest of the game world. The boomers may be relying on the NCR, who may be relying on the Brotherhood, and it creates a web that is not only realistic, but adds the kind of depth that very few RPGs are able to achieve. One character alone can do a lot if you're traveling in a party, but there's so much more to consider when, say, multiple factions are counting on the power from Helios 1. Of course, that's not to say that simply having a character there to wave a finger at you every time they're disappointed in you somehow elevates the game by itself. Fallout 4 tried to implement the same faction reputation system, if you want to be very charitable, but I have no reason to care. 1, because the world is a static sandbox where nothing you do matters anyway. 2, the writing is so appalling in general. And 3, I couldn't care less whether Piper or any of the other companions live or die anyway. The faction or character needs to be built up in a way that has the player invested enough that they actually care about any choices they might be making. Otherwise, it feels just as hollow as driving on the sidewalk in Saints Row. This is why I cared so much more about helping First Recon, or the people at Camp Forlorn Hope, than I did anyone in the entirety of Baldur's Gate 3. Not just because of how poorly written and nonsensical the entire main story is, or how plot devices change to be whatever the writers want it to be, but because your investment in what these characters or groups do turned out to be completely meaningless anyway. The discussion around binary morality in video games is hardly something new, but at the same time, we've had the answer and better ways to approach it right in front of us for many years now. I can certainly appreciate why few games tackle the issue of branching choice and consequence in a meaningful way to begin with, because budgets are already ballooning as it is, but storytelling in games can be so much more than watching an arbitrary bar go up. Specific to RPGs, it'd be great to see less of meters, and instead stronger writing behind conveying what the choices actually mean. Sure, there should still absolutely be mechanical consequence. Rogue Trader and Wrath of the Righteous are two fantastic games that are elevated more by the replay value that paths or specific gear provide, but it's important not to miss the forest for the trees. For any choice to be meaningful in the world, you first need to make it meaningful to the player. Hit them where it hurts, and we're going to have some truly great stories to tell.